I have to still be passionate and obviously want to get it right. And I'm a perfectionist, which I think is why I go home and I refilm it and go, oh, I should have done it like this, and whatnot. But because I want to kind of nail it. But also I think what this whole experience has taught me is that actually, it's okay to find your way to something. And actually what's really amazing is learning from every new day and not feeling the pressure to nail it straight away and get it right. Because I think and trust your instincts a little bit more, which I think I've definitely learned from doing Normal People, is actually, instead of second guessing my thoughts on something the whole time, of going, no, I think my instinct was right there. And actually it was, because when I watch it back, it works. I can watch it and be proud of it, actually, which I'm very, very relieved about.
Filmmaker Magazine presents Back to One with Peter Rinaldi.
Daisy Edgar-Jones is an actor. She sat down with me in cyberspace to talk about the work.
Where were you in your acting life when you found out about the Normal People audition?
So I'd been acting sort of on and off, mainly off, for about 4 years. And I'd had, little parts here and there, but, and got really close to stuff that I felt was really exciting and, potentially a game changer, but hadn't quite got them. And before Christmas, I got a part, just before Christmas last year, I got a part in a series called War of the Worlds, which was really one of my first kind of bigger parts, but still very much kind of in a massive ensemble, which was really brilliant, because it was I always think those are the most interesting kind of ways to learn, really, is being able to watch other people and learn from them. But so I was filming that actually when I got my audition through for Normal People. So yeah, which obviously Normal People is a kind of on a different level in terms of for actors. It's so much about character, and it's such a two-hander. And I'd never really had an audition really as well as a young person about young people, but told in a way that's that doesn't kind of trivialize or brush over the kind of dark parts of growing up, which is very true for everyone. So yeah, it was incredibly exciting when I got that audition through.
Did you know about the book at that time?
So I knew of it. I hadn't read it, but I knew of it because a lot of my friends were absolutely obsessed with it. In fact, one of my best friends is studying and is writing her dissertation on Sally Rooney. So she's like a huge fan and had bought it for my flatmate and was like, you have to read it. So I knew of it, but I hadn't read it until in between auditioning for the part was when I first read it myself.
And when you say in between auditioning, is that because there was many auditions?
So for me, actually, I had a slightly different process than Paul. I had my first self-tape, and that was really late on, I think, in their audition process. I think they'd seen quite a few Mariannes before I got my tape, and I think Paul actually had been cast by then and had had a few chemistry reads with other girls. And then I had my self-tape come through and I filmed it and I sent it off, and I got my hands on the book as soon as I could, because I didn't have time to read it before my self-tape was due. But I fell so in love with the character just from the sides I had for the audition, because I just thought they were so funny. I loved her. I thought it was the scene where she's eating in the book actually, and she's eating chocolate spread. In the series, for some reason, we went for ice cream. But anyway, and she's like, oh, maybe you should give me grinds, Connell. And I remember I got chocolate spread. I was actually filming War of the Worlds at the time, so I had to do it at my lunch break, and I was like, oh god, got like chocolate spread, got like someone found a light from somewhere, got my friend to read for me, but I thought she was so funny just from those sides. And then I got my hands on the book and I read it, and then I had my chemistry read with Paul about 2 weeks later.
Paul talks extensively about that chemistry read, because I was so fascinated that he had the experience of reading with a bunch of wonderful actors, not sure if he had the part, then me reading with a bunch of wonderful actors when he knew he had the part, and then you came. I heard you say that when you walked into that chemistry read, you looked at him and said, "This is Connell." Is that true?
It is true, because I mean, I find it really interesting talking to Paul about, because I've never been on that side of things because often when you're coming to chemistry reads with people, neither of you have been cast, and so, but I've never had it where, I've been cast and I'm sort of reading with other people. And Paul, it was really interesting hearing Paul speak about that, because I think what is really comforting to know is that when you get to those chemistry reads, you've actually, everyone is good enough to play the part, which I think, because sometimes it feels as an actor as, almost the further and closer you get to a part, the bigger the knock is, and the bigger you feel like the rejection and the failure. But actually what Paul, said to me was, which I thought was really interesting, is that every single person he read with could have played Marianne standing on their head and would have been amazing, which I think's a real comfort, because then you realize, oh, actually, when I do get close to a part, I shouldn't think of it as a failure if I don't get it, because it's actually an incredible achievement to get close to it, because it means I'm good enough,
Yes.
Which I thought was really, really interesting. And actually what it does come down to is something that is actually out of your control. It's nothing to do with talent or ability. It's to do with some kind of expressive thing that, which is this chemistry that people talk of so much, and I'm not quite sure what that is. I mean, I think it really is. It's like a creative chemistry almost, in that you both have a very similar understanding of the dynamic between characters, and therefore that kind of you bring a different side of each other out when you act together, which I definitely feel like I have when I act with Paul. I feel like he allows me to act or play scenes differently than I would on my own, and that's kind of really, that's what chemistry is about, really, is it's finding this mutual dynamic between two people. But when I'd read the book, obviously, and I'd read it imagining myself as Marianne, because I was auditioning for it at the time, so it was quite an intense reading process. So when I went to Ireland, and I accidentally walked in on Paul auditioning with somebody else, because I got the wrong door, and I was like, oh my God, like totally mortified. But yeah, I remember seeing him sat down and thinking, oh my God, that's Connell. And obviously, because I'd read the book, I felt like I knew him. Obviously, Paul's not Connell and hasn't lived the exact same life and whatnot, but it was very strange seeing him, because I was like, oh, that's perfect. He's just like how I imagined.
And you know what's beautiful about what you said about chemistry being about creative chemistry is so important and so beautiful, because when we hear the word chemistry, and because there is really something dynamic between you guys, and of course there's something that has to be kind of you're dancing in the sexual realm, there's a lot of that in the series, but there has to be that there. But it seems like we're forgetting that the important thing is this: you guys are both really smart actors, and if you couldn't have that exchange with each other, it would have been a problem. And that's a testament to Lenny, saying like they have to be able to work together creatively and feed off each other. It's not just about the sexual sparks.
Yes, definitely, because I think with Marianne and Connell, that element, the physical element, there is definitely a chemistry there, or a special kind of communication that they have when it comes to the physical side of their relationship. But actually, I think what makes them really exciting is their intelligence, and they both really spark each other intellectually. They really excite each other. But also, I think when you're playing a truthful relationship, a massive part of anybody's relationship, be it with friends or family, or in terms of a partner, is having a similar ability to find the same things funny, have a shared sense of humor. And I think Paul and I were able to, when we were playing Marianne and Connell, we would laugh and we would react at each other's lines when we felt they were funny. And I think that's because we found the similar humor in the lines that as actors we both found the same lines kind of funny, if you know what I mean. So we were able to kind of create this shared humor, which is a larger part of chemistry, is being able to have that have a laugh together, really, I think, when it comes to, friendships and couples and things like that.
So you have a little bit of Irish in your heritage, but this is the first time you had to put on this Irish accent. Is this just an added layer that you layer in? Is it something you put on at the end? Was this a worry? Was this something that you had to constantly be touched up on throughout the shoot, like from a dialect coach or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly was a worry because there's nothing more jarring than watching a performance and being taken out of it because the accent's just a little bit off, and I really wanted to make sure that wasn't the case. But at the same time, I love acting in accents. In fact, I much prefer acting in accents because I feel far less self-conscious if I'm speaking in somebody else's voice than my own. If I'm acting in my own accent, I'm like, oh God, it's a bit eggy, or I sound like
That's
a bit
interesting.
dramatic. Because my own accent, is sort of naturally slightly self-conscious. So I think I've always found accents incredibly fascinating, and I think they are so important in creating a character because the specificity of it and the detail of it says so much about somebody's upbringing, and my accent itself is a massive melting pot of so many things. I've got a bit of the north of Ireland in my accent because I grew up with my granddad for a large part of my teenage years, and my mum is Northern Irish, and but I've also, my dad's Scottish, so I've got Scottish in my accent. And then I've played like Manchester, I played a part in a Mancunian part for 4 years now, so I've sort of got a slightly Manchester accent as well. And I now probably a slightly Sligo accent. So I'm that says so much about my life because it shows all the kind of different contexts that I've experienced, and it shaped my accent. So I love acting in accents, and particularly with Marianne, I felt it was so important. Her character was already sort of at least 40-50% of her for me was created when I got the detail of the accent right, because there's a certain kind of detail in the way we wanted her voice to sound, because I think, which was really helpful because Lenny had a very, very specific idea of it. He wanted her to kind of have the sort of the hint of the Sligo, but he didn't want her to be as strong as her friends, because I think when you're with your peers, you all kind of speak in a collective voice together, but Marianne doesn't really have any friends her own age, and her mother is a bit posher, so he wanted her to have the slightly kind of softer accent. So that was really helpful to find that detail. But also he wanted her, she's very, very intelligent, and so is Sally, who wrote the book, and she's from Mayo, so she's got some similar sounds in her voice. So I listened to Sally speak quite a bit because she has a very kind of just a beautifully succinct way of speaking and incredibly measured, and she only says exactly what she needs to say. She never, unlike me, who waffles on and says about 50 different words for one to say one thing, she says exactly what she needs to say, and in such an eloquent way. And so I tried to kind of get a little bit of that. But I even remember in my audition, Lenny was like, because we had all of the girls who were down to the final 5 had like an hour with an accent coach before our audition. And the lovely guy, Paul, who was working with me, he was saying, your accent's actually quite good. So if you go in with a slightly more your own accent and then put it on, it will look more impressive. I went in like, hello. And then, hello, my name's Josie. But I remember like Lenny was like, even in the audition said, we were thinking about potentially when she goes to Trinity, do we sort of start to add slightly more Dublin sounds into her voice and stuff. And I don't know if we ended up doing that because I think that would have been too, because we weren't filming in order. I'd have been like, where the heck is my voice at? But I loved the idea of playing with that detail and of playing with that, because I think just accents say so much about a character. So yeah.
And I hope you're practicing your various American accents, because I'm sure Hollywood is calling major now. It is shocking to me how fast and I'm assuming everyone, falls in love with Marianne in the beginning. I wanted to know if you guys, everyone, like Lenny, Sally, everyone was worried, because there's an abrasiveness that can be, if it's not approached right, can, you could spend half the episode, maybe the next episode, trying to get the people to like her. We're in love when she's walking out of the classroom. I mean, and I'm like, why? How did that happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting you say that, because I found it really fascinating when I first was introduced to the book, and I followed this kind of like normal people kind of book readers thing on Instagram, and people would sort of put up their reviews of the book, and I saw so many times how people felt they didn't they found Marianne quite hard to like, which I think actually in some ways is really refreshing, because it's really nice to have a character that isn't perfect, which I think is really refreshing for a lot of people to read, because none of us are, and it's actually nice to go on a journey with someone who is flawed and complex and really very human in that way. And both Connell and Marianne, throughout the series they make, and throughout the book, they make so many kind of wrong moves, and particularly Connell, he hurts Marianne quite a lot, but Marianne also kind of knows how to sort of grate Connell, and like he says at the ghost estate, he asks, do you like making me feel uncomfortable, because she has this way of doing that,
Yeah.
But really, and I found it really interesting how many people sort of would say that about Marianne, that they found her quite cold and tricky to like. But really, when I read the book, I really didn't see that in her. I particularly in her chapters, but also with subtle hints, like the way that Lorraine says to Connell, she's a very sensitive person. You have to know that. And I think Lorraine sees that Marianne, though she may sometimes come across quite strongly, she's an incredibly vulnerable person, and very complex and very deep, and actually, even though Connell doesn't realize that sometimes, that is Marianne's, that's the truth of Marianne. So I think that's why, like, when I came to playing her, I wanted to make sure that I didn't feel I couldn't lean into the parts of her that were awkward and made people uncomfortable and weren't always perfect. I wanted to celebrate the coldness that she sometimes is, and the the kind of I guess the ugly side of her in terms of personality and things. I wanted to enjoy that and not try and shy from it too much. But I also wanted to show that it was a complex thing. It wasn't, Marianne isn't one thing or the other. She's a whole range of things. And often when people are cold or abrasive or whatnot, that's usually coming from a place of vulnerability rather than actual coldness, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely.
So I think and obviously Marianne is incredibly different when she's with Connell. I think Connell brings out the truth of Marianne in that she even though she sometimes does make him uncomfortable, and she says what's on her mind and things like that, she's also her kind of, he brings out the the side of her that actually feels that maybe she could be loved, and maybe she is worthy of the love she has, and she isn't ultimately cold and whatnot. He brings out her kind of her in that way. And so quite a lot of the scenes in the show are with Connell, so that we see quite a lot of the softer side of Marianne. So making sure to ramp up certain parts of her in school. But I think I guess that's what I really love about Marianne too, is I think the reason that she floors her school friends is because she's so appears to so not care about the social ladder. And obviously when you're at school, that's your whole world revolves around where on the ladder you are.
Yes.
Then you go into adulthood and you realize no one cares. But at least at school, it's like it's the epicenter of everything. And Marianne, seemingly really doesn't care about that. But we know when we read her chapters that actually comes from, rather than Marianne not caring, it's more that she just doesn't feel like people will ever accept her onto it. So why try, and there's a brilliant bit where she talks about, she comes into school one day and she tries to be different, but nothing changes. And so she just, accepts that's her role. And so I really related to that at school of feeling like, I'd grown up and changed quite a bit from 11 to 16, but I wasn't quite able to become the person I changed into, because I was still with the same group of friends from when I was 11, and they'll always see me as the person they did when they first met me, you know. And I had a nice time at school. I didn't have as tough a time as Marianne, but you know, at the same time, I did really relate to the kind of feeling of going to college and being able to redefine who you were, which Marianne, you know, definitely tries to do at Trinity.
I spent a lot of time talking with Paul about one scene, which was his therapy scene, and I wanted, you know, to get an idea of his approach on that day and everything. I think my favorite scene in the entire series is in episode 5, and it's just you two sitting, not moving. It's a really long scene where Paul apologizes for not asking you to come to the Debs. And I've watched that scene like 3 or 4 times just on its own after I saw it. And something that me and my one of my filmmaking friends used to say when we were younger: all you need is 2 guys in a room. All you need is 2 guys in a room. You don't have to worry about all this. You don't have to worry about, you know, when we didn't have any money to make anything, we kept saying, write your 2 guys in a room script. Where's your 2 guys in a room? You know, but I never really believed that that's all you need until I saw this scene, Daisy. There's not even mise en scène, you know what I mean? Like there's no camera move. There's no, it's just you guys. So I want to know, like, at this point, were you really loving working with Paul at this point? Were you looking forward to the idea of just getting to this scene and having to just be able to sit and have, but there's such a place you had to get to emotionally that you got to that kills me each time. And so I just wanted to hear you talk about that scene a little bit from the inside.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so chuffed that you mentioned it, because it's actually it's my favorite scene as well, and it's actually Lenny, the director's favorite scene.
Wow.
And you know, it really felt exciting when we finished that day, because it felt like we'd done something quite special. And I think, just like you said, really, you know, I think it's so interesting that those characters are so they're kind of known for their lack of ability sometimes to communicate properly. But actually, when you watch that scene, you realize that, you know, even though they do sometimes miss each other, when they are in that sort of really in sync place, they speak in such an incredibly honest way. And, you know, Lenny spoke about it before, like, so much of filmmaking is about, you know, the tension of what's not being said, or the kind of, like, you know, the mystery of the thing that's hidden. But it's actually so thrilling to watch 2 people just look at each other from across the room and speak properly.
Yes.
Like properly talk and listen and understand. And, you know, I really love what, you know, normal people as a script and as a story allowed Paul and I to do that in so many moments. You know, there's that moment in episode 2 when they, you know, are together for the first time. There's a brilliant scene that leads up to it where they just sort of speak. And same with episode 11, you know, they're sat on the bed and they speak, and it's 2 people just talking. And it's so wonderful, because it's, you know, you're really playing, you're not having to act, because, you know, the conversation, the dialogue is makes so much sense. It's not, you're not pulling for anything, because it's so naturalistic and it's so truthful. And so I loved, you know, as you said, I really loved working with Paul, and we'd been working together for quite a while at that point. So we had a really sort of shorthand way, you said it before, but we had a very shorthand way of kind of locking into those characters. And, you know, that really is, we found that so easy. So really it was breaking down exactly what the main, you know, story beats are in that moment. And Lenny, he's very flexible with dialogue, so, you know, often Paul and I were very, very involved with the writing and with rewriting anything and moving dialogue, and often at the start of every single day we would change most of the dialogue, just to make sure that it always flowed and sat very easily in our kind of mouths when we spoke, you know, because I think beautiful language can be beautiful to read, but it's not always the easiest to act, because, you know, it's not natural that you would, you know, usually when you're speaking, you're finding things and whatnot. So even though those characters are incredibly intelligent, you know, the kind of naturalism in it is really helpful. But I just loved it. I love scenes like that. It feels like you're almost doing a play, so you're not having
Yes.
to, the hardest scenes are when you see it on the page. It says, the start of the scene is Marianne bursts into tears, and you're like, oh god, like, oh my god, I've got to try and find this from somewhere. But with those scenes, it starts off and they're speaking about one thing. She says, oh, you're top, how do you feel, you're the star of the year and whatnot, that must feel really cool.
Mm-hmm.
And then slowly, just like with everyone and naturally with conversation, they start to move on to a different topic that's completely different, and it gets to a place where they finally speak about something that they've been wanting to for a long time. And so getting there wasn't as hard, because it just naturally, we'd been with those characters a long time, and therefore, it was not too easy, not too hard to empathize with that character. And I knew, because I'd played those scenes where she gets broken up with, and I'd played that before I knew the pain that she'd felt, so I was able to kind of to use it. But yeah, I love that scene too. I think it's just really special.
I'm imagining, like Paul, you were so thankful that you had this book to keep going back to during the shooting, but something I should have asked Paul, and I want to ask you, is, was there a certain point toward the end where it actually became a little weird to dip back in the book, because your character, whatever you were creating, is so much different than what you were reading in the book? Did you ever have that kind of feeling, like toward the end, where like it's almost like your creation of Marianne almost kind of only in your mind kind of dwarfs whatever you were thinking as a reader, and then it's almost detrimental to look back at the book?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly with some story arcs and things in the series, they're slightly different to the book. I guess her kind of relationship with her family isn't quite as harsh as it is in the book, and certainly episode 9 in Sweden is quite different to the book. But I think, to be honest, I think that what I've been really sort of moved by the reaction to the series is that lots of people who haven't read the book have commented and made sort of remarks about the series and questions about it that I had when I finished reading the book, if you know what I mean. In that, It's nice to know that certain moments, even though they are slightly different, have still translated, and tonally you're still left with the same kind of feeling and question and interpretation of those characters as you are really when you read the book. So that's been really nice. But yeah, I mean, certainly by the end, the scripts were so beautiful too, that they, we obviously relied a lot on them, and the detail of them, and Alice Birch, who wrote the latter 6, writes an incredible amount of detail actually in her stage directions, which are really beautiful, and a lot of it lifted from the book and things like that. So they were really, incredibly close to the chapters when you read the scripts, which was really cool. But yeah, I mean, I find this kind of this conversation about inner life really fascinating, and as an actor, that's the thing that I love most about acting, is being able to step inside the inner life of someone else, because I just find it really interesting that you're walking along the street and everybody else has this whole world going on in their heads that I don't know about and can't access. And so as an actor, that's what I love being able to do that. And the book is so accurate in the way it depicts kind of the sort of the difference between somebody's view of themselves as opposed to the way they're viewed by someone else. And when you read Connell's chapters, I think Marianne is quite different to the way Marianne is in her head. And so therefore, as an actor, coming to scenes and playing, trying to show a little bit of what's really going on, but also, showing the other character in the scene with you what you want them to see. It was quite fun to play with.
Whoa, wait. How did you do that? You mean you're saying how practically?
I mean, I think weirdly, so much of it's, so much of screen acting is so it's so important to be aware of lens and of camera and things like that. And I think sometimes, you know, when I was younger and first started acting, I was almost quite scared of the camera, being like, oh God, they can see everything, or they can see that I'm not being truthful, or, you know, it looks like I'm acting and blah, blah, blah. But actually, you know, I learned so much on that job about how the camera can be such a kind of, it is a friend, and it actually is your little sort of journey to the audience, and you can kind of, with particular angles, you can tell a secret to the audience that only they'll know. So I mean, I played with that quite a lot. I got quite interested in, you know, Lenny talked a lot about he had special cameras for Marianne and Connell called, you know, the Marianne special or the Connell special. Whoa. Which would be the kind of the angle you see, which is the camera really close, very shallow depth of field, like roaming around. Yeah. And so for me, I thought, well, this is the Marianne special. If it's, you know, if we're really up close here, this is my chance to show the vulnerable side, or show the sort of the complexity that Marianne is feeling in this scene. And then when it was a wide angle or a top shot, or you know, a kind of view of you from over the shoulder of the different character, you're going to show them, I guess, Connell's perspective of that character, and the way the character, you know, for Marianne particularly, she can sometimes come across incredibly abrasively, and Connell always talks of the fact that she's very sure of herself and whatnot. But I know from when I read Marianne's chapters that that's not the case, that she's incredibly you know, insecure and has very low self-esteem, and thinks that she's unworthy of love and is ultimately cold. So yeah, playing with those two was something I found incredibly fascinating, and also, you know, in exploring the detail of how Marianne changes. You know, she changes a lot actually from episode 1 to 12, and we weren't filming in order, so plotting the details of her growth and change was something I found really interesting too.
And does this mean that you're constantly looking at playback, trying to say, does that play? Does that play? Does that play?
No, actually, I mean, I think what's really nice is I think we were really lucky. We had a lot of trust in Lenny and Hetty, our directors, and also, you know, Susie and Kate, the DOPs, are so talented that you know that they're catching it all. They're so intelligent, you know, camera wise. The camera is incredibly in tune to us as we are with it, you know. And so I never really looked at playback, and, you know, sometimes would go home and be like, oh God, I don't know if I did that right. But on the whole, it was just, you know, you never felt like you were having to perform anything. You just had to think the lines and say the words, and, you know, the camera would be close enough to register the thoughts that are happening and moving across your face, and then also obviously an amazing editor that can pull other reactions and you know, make them work too, because that's so much part of the process too, and the right music and stuff. Like, I just find filmmaking amazing. The kind of the team behind making something work is so incredible. You know, if you have the right music and the right camera and the right editor and the right actor in lines, you know, that's when magic happens. It's such a team process.
Do you have trouble watching yourself, like when it's all over? Did you have trouble just checking this out?
I think, you know, I always have before. I think I you know, it's very hard to be objective and to be able to watch it with a, you know, from a distance for the first time, because you're too busy thinking like, oh, like, why did I say it like that? Or I remember that day and we only had 5 minutes to get all those, you know, all those shots, and I wish we'd had more time and whatnot. And so, you know, at first it's very hard to tune that voice out. But I actually, you know, with normal people, weirdly, I found it a little bit easier to get than I had ever before, to get lost in it, because, you know, I hadn't really watched much of the footage, and I had no idea of the music they were going to choose or the grading or whatnot. So it was, you know, so the music for me is so like, it transports you into that world, and it was sort of easier, weirdly, to watch it and not feel like it was me, you know, because that character is so different. So yeah, I didn't find watching normal people as awful as I thought I would. So I thought I was gonna have to watch the whole thing through my hands, but I managed to kind of forget quickly that it was me, which was nice.
I heard you in another interview really open up about, you know, your insecurities as as an actor, and how, and even how, like, I think you kind of mentioned it here, how you would go home and play out the scenes in front of the mirror sometimes and see if you got it right, which shocked me because nothing seems performative in your performance. So the idea that you would play it over or whatever in your own mind and in your own to see if you got it is so crazy to me. But I almost don't even want to talk about this, because whatever it is that you were working with there, insecurity, whatever, I hope it stays because it's working. But I think it's important to just talk about that a little bit, though, because now seeing the reaction to this thing for you, having those insecurities even throughout the shooting, but knowing it was going great, but now seeing that people are reacting to your performance, what is that doing to you? What are you, now we've been in lockdown, of course, so you're able to stew with this and you're able to process this. How is that processing in your mind for the next time you're on a set?
I think it's been amazing. I think I'm incredibly relieved, really, on the whole, that that people do like it and are happy, especially readers of the book, and because it's not often that people read the book and then also like the series. Usually it's quite hard to let go, and as particularly with those two characters, is that Sally writes them so vividly and beautifully that you feel that you own them and they're yours, and it's only you in their secret world, so for readers to also accept and like are solidifying of it into a visual medium is really, it's an immense relief. And I think also what makes me excited is I guess I learned so much on that job. By the end I'd kind of learnt and also discovered that I could do certain scenes that I didn't know if they were in me. I didn't know if I could, because I'd never had the chance, or I'd never had the challenge of playing big emotions, or playing kind of big long dialogue scenes, or big sort of dramatic moments. I'd never really had. So I think that was amazing, and I think therefore what I'm really excited is knowing how much I still have to learn, and actually and feeling confident that I can, and so I think that's been really amazing, because it was even really interesting because we actually filmed a few pickups just before lockdown.
Oh wow.
One of which was the final scene of the whole series, so
Oh,
that
wow.
was a year later.
Wow,
almost
yeah.
a year since we'd finished, and I had in between I had done my first stage play, and I'd wanted to do theatre all my life, so to be able to do that, and I literally finished the final evening, and then was flown to Ireland on the Sunday, so it was quite
Wow.
straight away. And it was really interesting thinking, going back to characters we played, it could really show me how much I'd learned just from the month of doing theatre. Already I'd learned a whole new set of skills. So I think that, I think that's what I've really learned, is to slightly take the pressure off of knowing that I don't have to, I have to still be passionate and obviously want to get it right. And I'm a perfectionist, which I think is why I go home and I refilm it and go, oh, I should have said it like this, and whatnot. But because I want to kind of nail it. But also I think what this whole experience has taught me is that actually, it's okay to find your way to something, and actually what's really amazing is learning from every new day and not feeling the pressure to nail it straight away and get it right. Because I think and trust your instincts a little bit more, which I think I've definitely learned from doing Normal People, is actually instead of second guessing my thoughts on something the whole time, of going, no, I think my instinct was right there, and actually it was, because when I watch it back it works, and I'm not kind of having to watch it all the whole time through my hands. Obviously there's certain scenes in the series that I definitely do, but on the whole, I can watch it and be proud of it, actually, which I'm very, very relieved about, but also relieved to know that I still have a lot of learning to do, and who knows what I'll learn in the next few years, and if my performance will change and whatnot.
Daisy Edgar-Jones, thank you so much for your time here. And I couldn't be more excited about your career. And selfishly, as an audience member, I'm happy that you exist in this profession.
Oh, that is so kind. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Back to One is a production of Filmmaker Magazine, which is a publication of IFP, the Independent Filmmaker Project. Listen to back episodes of this podcast at filmmakermagazine.com or wherever you get your podcasts.